Don't you hate that when you think the song is over and you start to clap and then they keep going? You guys recovered well, though. I like that. So, I know a lot of you guys have seen me stomping around here with a giant soda, looking like some kind of angry, over-caffeinated hobbit. And you don't really know who I am. That's because I'm a huge introvert, and believe it or not, I'm actually more comfortable talking to you from up here than I am one-on-one. So, I work here. My official job is web manager. But I'm also a husband and a dad. And my wife and I have an organization called iSalt, and it's a missions organization, but we don't just let people say, I want to go on a mission trip and raise a bunch of money and then take them somewhere. We actually take them through a process where we teach them some leadership and what it really means to be a missionary, because that isn't something that happens on the other side of the planet. It's something that happens at home and in your own neighborhood and then to the rest of the world. So a long time ago, I was a student, a college student. I was actually a student here, only here wasn't here, it was here. And it was a much different place back then. For instance, we didn't have chapel once a week. We had it twice a week, every week. And we had no concept of comfortable chairs anywhere on this campus, I can promise you. We didn't have this place, we had this place. Those are colors that do not exist in nature, and once you've been around them, they are burned forever in your memory, which is actually probably why I have to wear contacts today, which are messed up, so if it looks like I'm winking at you, I'm not. So I started here as a student in the fall of 1988. I know that was forever ago. I went here for a semester, took a semester off, came back in the fall of 1989, and in one of those awesome chapels, I showed up and I knew it was a mistake because there was hardly anyone there, and they said it was the student government chapel, and so freshmen go there, sophomores there, juniors there, seniors there. Juniors and seniors, the ones that had been there, totally bailed. They were gone. There were about 30 freshmen there, and I went with the sophomores, and there were only 5 of us. And the things that they told us to do were elect class officers and nominate a homecoming queen. So one thing that happened out of that was I became vice president of the sophomore class, and if you're paying attention, I was technically still a freshman. I guess no one was really paying too much attention. And actually, I know they weren't, because of the 5 of us that showed up, there was me and my friend Greg, our friend Brenda, and 2 other girls who, as soon as they realized that they didn't have to stick around, they took off. So we started saying, okay, they want us to write down a homecoming queen, and Brenda said nope. And we didn't know anyone else, so Greg and I did the only sensible thing. We made up a name. And we thought, okay, well, they'll figure it out, and we'll get out of here, and everything will be cool. But Greg came running to me the next day, and he said, did you see this? And he's got a list of all the homecoming queen candidates, and Lindsay Brooks is right there on the top. So, again, we did the only sensible thing. No one else had any school spirit, so we started putting up flyers all over the place. Vote for Lindsay. We were just talking it up, telling everyone. We'd be standing around talking, and people would be like, how come I never see this Lindsay? You just missed her. She was right here. She takes most of her classes in Troy. So the day before everyone was supposed to vote for these homecoming queens, the student government president ratted us out, and the dean of students thanked him and then made him sit and cross her name off all the ballots. This was pre-computer, so everything was on paper, and he had to sit and scratch your name off of everything. So after everyone voted, everyone's coming up to us, what happened to Lindsay? What happened? And Greg very brightly just blurts out, she died. So we kind of came up with the story that she was giving blood, as she often did, and there was a shift change, and bad stuff happened. So A little bit later, we managed to convince people that the Board of Trustees had been talking for a long time and decided that there are too many schools in the United States that use a Spartan as their mascot, and so they wanted to make a change, and they wanted it to be something very Missouri that we could be proud of. So they were going to change it to the Trout. And we just kind of ran with it, and we found out later that the cheerleaders demanded an audience with the president, and they were furious because all their cheers had to do with Spartans, and they didn't want to have to rewrite them all to Trout. Go Trout. So I wanted to talk to you about something a little bit more serious today. Relax, I'm totally joking. I don't even know what that means. 2007, my wife Natalie and I, we traveled to Bulgaria a lot, and we found ourselves in the city of Stara Zagora, which is a very, very old city. It was old when the New Testament was being written. And we're there, and we're looking around, and we're figuring out different things about what God's leading us to do. And we were sitting and talking with this lady who's a missionary, specifically to young women in Stara Zagora, because it's also one of the top 3 cities in all of Europe where young women are forced into slavery and trafficked to the rest of the world. And so she was meeting specifically to deal with these people, but we're sitting there and we hear all these kids starting to yell. And I grew up in North County, and I know what it's like when kids get ready to fight. And so we got up, and we went over to see what was going on. We grabbed our translator and brought him over. And we go over, and there's these 4 or 5 kids, and they're surrounding this one other kid. And we knew right away what was going on because this kid looked different. He had darker skin, and he was part of what historically people have called the gypsy community. It's actually kind of a derogatory term. But his skin's a different color, and he's part of this Roma minority community. And they were getting ready to fight, and he was kind of backed into a corner, and you could tell he was scared to death, but he was ready to go. And so we said, "Why are you messing with our friend?" And they all stopped and looked over at us. And I think first they looked at me, and they're like, eh. But then they looked at Natalie, and if you don't know Natalie, she's here today. She's beautiful, but she's 6'1", Hispanic, grew up in Chicago, and you don't mess with her. So they look over, and we start talking to him and kind of talk him down and say, why are you picking on him? Because he looks different than you. God made all of us. And we start talking to him, and Krasimir is his name, and he just kind of latched on to us. And we're pretty sure, actually we know now from talking to him, that up to that point, no one in his life had ever called him friend. And so he started hanging out with us all week, and everywhere we went, no matter what we were doing, out of the corner of our eye, we'd see this little dude running along around us. And if we were carrying stuff, he'd run up and grab it from us and carry it for us. And he would hang out with Natalie and her group. In the afternoons, they were just playing soccer with kids at a school. And he would show up there every day and just spent a lot of time with us that week. And when it came time for us to go, he showed up at the bus station and wanted to leave with us. And it kind of broke our hearts because obviously they frown on you taking small children out of Europe, no matter who they are. But it was kind of heartbreaking, and we didn't really speak Bulgarian at that point, and we had to help him understand, you can't come with us, but I'll make you a promise. And if you know me, the word promise is a big deal to me. I don't use it in my house at all unless I'm absolutely sure that I can follow through on it. So we promise you we will come back. And so we said goodbye and went on and did our stuff. And then we just immediately, we're talking about Krasi and how are we going to get back there? What are we going to do? And so that winter, Natalie had a chance to go back to Bulgaria with one of our friends, and they spent about 3 or 4 days walking around Stara Zagora. And I was here, and the temperature there was between negative 10 and 10 degrees that entire time. And they walked around, and everywhere they went, they would show people Krasi's picture and say, do you know this kid? Where can we find him? And everyone would be like, yeah, we know him. He's not here. Maybe he's over at this place. And so they would go to the next place, and the same thing would happen. Everyone knew Krasi. They thought they might know where he was, but no one really knew where he was. So they spent all this time, and they had a couple of our Bulgarian friends with them, and they were just out in this bitter cold searching for Krasi for days and never found him. So they got back to Sofia, which is the capital of Bulgaria, and Natalie called me from the hostel they were staying at, and I'll never forget what she said to me. The very first words she said to me when I said hello. There are European men in Speedos in my room. And I was like, don't look. Why are you telling me this? You go to Europe and you stay in a hostel, you just have to kind of, it's cheap, but you get what you get, you know. So we started talking, and she was kind of upset because we didn't find Krasi. We went everywhere. We looked everywhere, and everyone thought they knew where he was, and he wasn't there. And she was just really disappointed and upset. And I just talked through that with her, and we finally said, you know, here's what's cool. We were there, and we promised him that we were going to come back. And now, I'm pretty sure what happens, and by this time I had done some research, is that his whole community will have left Stara Zagora to go someplace warmer. Because they're incredibly poor, and they don't have coats, they don't have good clothes, so they just kind of pick everything up and move to where it's warmer, and then they'll come back. And when they come back, Krasi's going to go back to his usual hangouts, and everywhere he goes, people are going to be saying, Krasi, this winter when you weren't here, there was this giant American woman coming around with your picture looking for you. And he's going to hear that, and he's going to know exactly who it was. And he's going to know that we kept our promise. And so, over time, I started thinking, and it kind of reminds me of one of my favorite Bible stories, and it's in Matthew chapter 14. And even if you didn't grow up in or around church, you've heard of this event. By the way, I grew up in Sunday school, and my Sunday school teacher was named Doris Lambert, and she was about 115 years old, and wonderful, wonderful, godly woman, and she taught us all these stories, but the way she did it is she used something called a flannel graph. Does anyone know what this is? And our church didn't have a lot of money, so there were like 6 characters to tell all the Bible stories, so David and Peter were the same kid, and there was one sheep that was missing a leg who showed up in all the stories. But when you grow up learning things that way, you tend to think of the Bible stories as stories, like a comic book, something made up. And the reality is they're not. That's one thing about Christianity, is that it's based on history, people that actually lived and breathed and did what it says. And so you have to kind of remember that when you're reading these stories. I'll just start here. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the 4th watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." Now, I will tell you that we didn't give up on Krasi after that. We didn't just check that off and say, okay, we kept our promise. We started immediately making plans to go back to Stara Zagora the next summer with our team. And we told our friends in Bulgaria, we will serve and do whatever you need us to do, but at some point in our trip, we're going to Stara Zagora because we're going to find Krasi. And we said that every time we talked to them. And they were like, okay, we'll go to Star Zagora. And we didn't realize it, but they thought we were absolutely nuts. And we didn't really think about it, but we're talking about going 5,000 miles away from here to a city of 200,000 people to find a kid whose last name we don't know. We don't know where he lives or anything else about him other than that he hangs out downtown sometimes. So our Bulgarian friends were being pretty gracious, saying, okay, we'll go with you. We'll humor you. And we ended up going back there, and I'll never forget, we got there kind of early on a Sunday morning, and so we went to church. And the church we went to is this little tiny church, and there are about maybe 10 women in there, all over the age of 70, one young pastor, and the service just goes on and 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 on. And then you think it's done, just like that song, it goes on and on and on. And then the service was over, and we're like, okay, we're going to go find Cross. And like, oh, no, we have to have lunch first. So then all these old ladies start pulling out food, and it's bread and cucumbers and tomatoes, and it's still not prepared. So they start cutting cucumbers and bread. We got to go. And cutting. And then they start feeding you and 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 feeding you. And then they start cutting more stuff. We're good. We're good. Thank you. We really did appreciate what they were doing, but we had stuff to do. So we went to our hotel, and it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon there, which meant it was about 7 o'clock in the morning here. So we called our pastor, and we said, hey, we're getting ready to go find Crossy. Would you pray for us? And he prayed for us, and we left our hotel. And I don't want to ruin this for you, but we didn't find Crossy. So Peter, if you go back to this story, this happens right after Jesus feeds 5,000 people, actually more than 5,000. He feeds 5,000 men, not counting the women and children, using some kids' Lunchables. This is a pretty amazing thing. Everyone's heard about Jesus feeding the 5,000, just like they've heard about Jesus walking on water. And he tells his disciples, after they get done cleaning everything up, and they each get a doggy bag. I don't know if you noticed, it said there were 12 baskets left over, so they each got one. He says, you guys get in the boat and go on to the other side. And he's talking about the Sea of Galilee, which is not a big, it's a big lake, but it's not huge. And the place he's sending them, they could have walked to in probably 3 or 4 hours, max. He tells them, get in the boat, go to the other side, I'll meet you over there. So they get in the boat, and they start going, and the disciples, several of them are professional fishermen. They've grown up on this very lake. They know how to handle a boat. They know what it's like to be out in the weather. But they're fighting and fighting and fighting, and hours go by. This is really cue the Gilligan's Island theme. Should have taken a really little bit of time, and it takes them hours and hours and hours, and they're stuck out in the middle of the lake. And I love this because this is one of the things that says to me that God has a great sense of humor. Because if you get 12 guys together and you're trying to do something and it's not working, imagine being in a minivan with 12 of your friends, with 11 of your friends for 3 or 4 hours, and it keeps breaking down. You know what's going to happen, right? So that's what these guys are doing. You got the guys who aren't fishermen going, can't you guys fix this? And the guys who are fishermen saying, shut up or I'm going to hit you with the paddle. And they're rowing and they're trying to get through and they're going and going and going. And they're just angry and cussing at each other probably, hanging onto their doggy bags still. And they're going, and here comes Jesus. Hey guys. He's walking on top of the water. So they start flipping out. Ah! And Peter, I love Peter because Peter reminds me of my roommate when I lived in the dorm here. My roommate's name was Lyle Witcher, and he's an awesome guy. He's still one of my best friends. But Lyle's one of those guys that is always saying something and has to kind of be at the center of everything. And if no one else is going to say something, he will. Peter says, "Oh yeah, if that's you, tell me to come to you." And Jesus says, all right, come on. Ooh. Dang it. But Peter can't back down, so he steps out. And if you were in Sunday school with me, this is the part where Mrs. Lambert taught this from one point of view, and probably a lot of you have heard this. Peter gets out. Poor dumb Peter. He starts going and he fails. Right? It says he starts to walk to Jesus and he sees the wind and he gets scared and he starts sinking. He calls out. Jesus grabs him. Says, why did you doubt? Which, by the way, who did Peter doubt? He didn't doubt Jesus. Jesus is standing there on top of the water. Peter doubted himself. He doubted that he was able to do what God was calling him to do. And that's when he started to sink and got back in the boat. And the way I learned this growing up, you could kind of imagine all the other guys in the boat kind of laughing at him. Why you all wet, Peter? That was awesome. You started. But here's the thing. I think that if that's what happened, if those guys said that to Peter, you know what I think he said? And the Bible doesn't say this, but here's what I think Peter would have said. I think it would have gone something like this. I just walked on water. You sat in the boat, hanging onto your doggy bag. Two people in recorded history have walked on water, Jesus and Peter. Every one of these guys just got done seeing Jesus feed 5,000 people with what was barely enough for one person. They were still holding the evidence of it. They'd seen him heal people. They'd seen him calm the storms before. They'd seen him do so many different things. They knew who he was. And when Jesus said, get out of the boat, only one of them got up. So, here's the thing. Being a Christian isn't an academic exercise. You can learn all the stories. You can know how to find Obadiah faster than anyone else. Doesn't mean anything if you don't put it into action. James actually talks about this. He says, you can say all kinds of things, but if you don't put it into action, it's nothing. Faith without works is dead. James also says that religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after widows and orphans in their distress and remain uncorrupted by the world. Now, I don't know where you're at today. I know a lot of you are Christians. If you call yourself a Christ follower, I want to talk directly to you for a second. When you made that choice, when you became a Christ follower, you automatically got a new job title: missionary. Doesn't mean that everyone's going to spend the rest of their life hacking their way through a jungle with a machete. Being a missionary starts in your own home. Read about Jesus healing the demon-possessed man who wanted to come with him, and Jesus said, no, go home. And you can talk about being a Christian all you want, but if that's all it is, it's worthless. You need to get out of the boat. This incident changed Peter's life, and I can prove it to you. If you go to John chapter 21, after Jesus has been crucified and resurrected, the disciples are back out on this same lake in a boat. And they're not sure what's going on. They haven't seen Jesus yet. All of a sudden, someone's waving to them from the shore, and it's Jesus. And as soon as they figure out it's Jesus, does anyone know what happens? Some of them start to row. Peter doesn't. Peter jumps up and gets out of the boat. He says, if Jesus says come, I don't need a stinking boat. And he goes. History also tells us that Peter was later crucified in Rome with his wife. And the last thing that Peter said, according to historians, is, it's okay, remember Jesus. This is nothing. So we never found Krasi. We had our Bulgarian friends with us, and they were all still kind of humoring us, and we started walking through the city center, and we had gotten up to the main street in Stara Zagora and turned and started walking, and we hadn't gone 100 feet. And we're kind of looking around, hoping, and we see these two little shapes about 100 yards away start bouncing toward us. It's like one of those Monty Python movies where the guys are standing there like this, and then you see do-do-do-do-do-do. We didn't find Krasi. Krasi and his brother found us. You think it's weird to think that you can go halfway around the world to a city of 200,000 people and find one kid. Well, it's even weirder that one kid will be sitting there waiting for you because you made a promise and you pointed him to the creator of the universe. So that's all I got for you today. You guys have so many opportunities to get out of the boat. There's service organizations over in Bywaters right now waiting for people to get out of the boat and help them. You've got opportunities with Jay White to go to England, to Florida, to Haiti. You can come with us to Bulgaria. There's so many opportunities that you have to get out of the boat and do what God's called you to do. We're out of time. If you need to go, you can go. But if you want to see some pictures of Krasi, because we go back and we see him every single year since then you can check this out.
Take a little step, don't be scared. Just another step, we're almost there. And I know it's hard to see, but I'll hold you close to me. The ground's gonna shake, the wind will blow, the water's gonna rise, but this I know, there will surely come a day when the pain will fade away. In Jesus, every fear and every shame will finally be erased. In Jesus, every hurt will be redeemed, every bitter thing made sweet. In Jesus. They can't understand from the outside, and no one really knows the tears you've cried. On the inside you've got scars, but the healer knows your heart. And in Jesus, every fear and every shame will finally be erased. In Jesus, every hurt will be redeemed, every bitter thing made sweet. In Jesus. If you feel the heavy weight of the guilt, regret, and blame, I know how to break those chains. Just call His name. Jesus, Jesus. In Jesus, every fear and every shame will finally be erased. In Jesus, every in